Hey, well, welcome everyone. I know we are still letting folks into the webinar. Welcome and happy Friday, happy November, happy Thanksgiving, all of it. We're certainly grateful for you all here. We will start maybe in about another 30 seconds to a minute or so as folks continue to enter.
Happy Friday, everyone. I'm getting ready to, I think I finished admitting everyone at this point. So I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. When they're ready to go, it's ready.
Right. Thank you, Jeff. Again, good afternoon to everyone. Welcome. I am a former board member, Mary Mendoza Newman, she, her, pronouns, also the 2020 conference chair and the 2022 tri chair. I guess there's three of us, so I don't know exactly how to say that, but it's tri chair. So anyway, we are certainly delighted to have everyone here. Want to thank you all for coming to all of our webinars. It's been about a year now that we've been doing the webinars. And just a reminder, this was because we canceled the 2020 conference. And so we are so grateful to our plenary, our keynote, and all of our concurrent program presenters for agreeing to do webinars with us. So this is the final one. And a reminder that we will be continuing to send out information for the registration to our 2022 conference, which is in a couple months. And at this point, we are still planning to meet in person. If anything changes, we'll certainly keep you all informed. And reminder that many of the webinars are available on our APIC YouTube channel. I'll provide all that information in an email afterwards. But I am excited to introduce our, and let me find, let's see, I hope y'all can see that. So just a quick little overview of some logistics and Zoom etiquette. So our presenters today are Dr. Reiner, Dr. Jackson, Dr. Hal Martin, and we are going to be learning about creating and sustaining a culturally sensitive mentorship program for the budding psychologist and beyond, practical applications. Let me see if I can get this to change. There we go. So just a reminder that this is a meeting, so all participants are muted, and please use speaker view so you could see who is speaking. If you need to use the captions, please select closed caption on your Zoom toolbar. We do encourage the use of the chat box for any questions and comments during the presentation. We'll be monitoring that, so you are welcome to post your questions in the chat for the end of the webinar, where the speakers will provide some time to answer some questions. And if you do choose to speak when you ask your question, if you can remember to unmute and turn your video on so we could see you. And just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. And reminder also that we are providing continuing education. So if you're registered, you will receive an email to complete the evaluation and obtain some CE credit. Any handouts will be sent to you afterwards, made available on the website. So we'll the link to the YouTube channel. So Dr. Jeff Baker and myself will be moderating today. And here are the learning objectives for today. The speakers may review this, but we'll be learning about mentorship across the lifespan. And I'm not going to read all of them, but I want to allow time for the speakers to present. But we do have 4 learning objectives for today. And then lastly, these are our speakers, and these are their bios. Again, I won't be reading all of this because I want to just provide us with as much time to learn from them today. But we are very grateful for our colleagues in Dallas who will present to us. So I'm going to stop share and hand it over to you. Dr. Reiner?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Mendoza Newman. And I want to just give a big thank you to you and Dr. Baker and so many others for just giving this opportunity to us. I know the last year and a half has been so different than we expected. And I just really honor each of you for navigating this time, and that this is the final one. So just a congratulations to you all for your hard work and the completion of this. And thanks also for everyone to be joining today on a Friday afternoon all over the country. It's really neat to be together right before the holidays. So basically what we're going to be talking about today is a topic that's so near and dear to my heart because I've been incredibly impacted by it. And what's kind of neat is that the other two presenters are actually mentors of mine. So it's kind of mentorship in play. Even this presentation is a result of mentorship. So I'll explain a little bit about our story as we're kind of going through this, but I wanted to take a moment just as we're getting started, just to settle back in your chairs, wherever you're at, and just kind of reflect on how mentorship has impacted you throughout your career. For some of us, it might be, one or two individuals that really, made a difference in our careers, maybe back when we were in training. Maybe it's a current mentorship relationship that is a long-term one. But just kind of picture those faces, those memories, and just even ways that your career might have shifted because of those relationships. And we're in a very relational field, and so I think mentorship is even that much more important to really look at, because we grow through relationships. I mean, that's what psychology and therapy is all about. So I know mentorship is important to every field, but especially for our field. So we've kind of already gone over the learning objectives, but just keep in mind your own personal experience as we're walking through this, and then maybe ways that you'll be able to set up programs in your own clinics or training programs that might even facilitate those kind of relationships. All right, next slide. So basically mentorship is described as a process where an experienced person helps another person develop skills and knowledge. And I love this slide because how often have we felt like the little fish? We may still feel like that right now in certain areas of our lives. And how much do we benefit from having those bigger fish, look out for us and teach us those ways? So really kind of it's mutually beneficial. Even some of us may be mentoring others right now and not even realize that they may feel like that little fish. So it really is something that is just such a mutually beneficial relationship. And I'm not sure if there's formal mentorship programs among goldfish, but I'm sure it probably helps in all species and all people. So next slide. So mentorship is basically, in a nutshell, guidance, support, and encouragement. And we really, can benefit from this in, all areas of our life. We probably can't get enough of this. And so, these are kind of some of the nutshell, kind of bare bones basics of what mentorship is. We're going to go into a lot more details way beyond that, but just these are kind of the basics. Next slide. Okay. So we may think a lot about career when we think about mentorship. And actually, Dr. Hal Martin has been really impactful, really with this first function, which has included sponsorship, exposure and visibility, and coaching. She actually has helped me set up a mentorship program at UT Southwestern, where we're both on faculty. And we've actually set up a program we'll just describe a little bit later, where we've set up a process for new teaching faculty to be matched up with a senior faculty member. And so me being new at UT Southwestern, I wouldn't have known how to get involved, how to have exposure to the right people to promote this program. And so she really took it from the ground up and not only believed in me, coached me, but also gave me that exposure and visibility that I needed. Also mentorship can have provision of challenging assignments. So at times when there's a specific idea like we had for a mentorship program, there may be specific assignments, ways that idea turns into a broader program. And so having that teamwork approach, as well as someone who's gone before to really help, that makes such a difference. As well as, really keeping ethics in mind. We're going to talk a little bit later towards the end of the program about ethics and how that plays a role. There's also the psychosocial functions. So role modeling, really confirmation. I would add validation, support, even friendship. Sometimes when that mentorship task or specific plan is finished, you may have a lifelong friend as a result. So it can be much more mutual than sometimes other types of relationships that maybe have an evaluative component, maybe like supervision or other ways where there's a little bit more of a different flavor to it. Next slide. So we really kind of put a list of all different types of mentorship relationships, because we may just be used to certain types based upon our own experiences. And so we just included very common ones. It's not an exhaustive list. Of course, the probably most common one, established career versus early career. We'll talk about some programs that we've been involved in setting up for that purpose. Professor to student, that might just be built into that kind of relationship. Professional to professional, or peer mentoring. It might be someone kind of at your same level, but maybe they have expertise in an area that you want to learn about, or maybe you're making a career transition and you want to learn from them of what's worked for them. We've already talked about friendship. There are some mentorship relationships that are more task focused versus relationship based. So even Dr. Hal Martin, our relationship started with a specific task. Let's set up a mentorship program for UT Southwestern. Others may be more relationship based. I can think of in graduate school, my dear mentor who I TA'd for, it was more based upon our relationship. We really connected and I wanted to be like her. And we walked through so many years together. And I look back fondly that nurturing relationship really led to me being able to grow in ways as a future supervisor, as a future psychologist, to really connect with those that I'm with by modeling after her. Now, there can be a lot of variety. We're going to be talking about a variety of programs. Some have really frequent contact, like daily contact. Some is less frequent. I know Dr. Hal Martin and I do about biweekly meetings, sometimes by phone if we've had that Zoom fatigue, sometimes by video. And so, it's really been neat over the pandemic to be able to do a variety of options. I'm not sure if the daily contact would be doable in both of our schedule. I'm sure we'd enjoy it, but but it just depends on the task at hand and what's been needed. Dr. Jackson and I, we were actually matched together through a program from UT Southwestern that each VA faculty member has a designated mentor. And so we would meet periodically, not real often, but just to kind of plan, make sure I was doing what I needed to do. And actually, she's the reason that I even knew about this opportunity to present. So I really have to give her credit for being a visionary behind this. So it's been neat to even compare and contrast these two current mentor relationships I have and kind of the impact on me currently. Again, they're short and long-term mentorship relationships. And so that could be based upon the task being complete or other factors, someone moving or something changing. Or sometimes it just turns into long-term, even though that wasn't the expectation at the beginning. And again, there can be collegial collaborations, such as doing this presentation. All right, next slide. All right, so the importance of mentorship, I think probably as all of us reflected, we probably know personally that importance, but even noticing throughout our lives, it's important. And we'll talk a little bit more about just the research behind that. But it's shown to be highly important at every stage of the lifespan of the psychologist. And so I know many of us are involved in training programs. Maybe we may be more aware of those kinds of mentorship programs, but it's probably helpful later in someone's career, even to have a mentor. So you're never too established to have a mentor or too, not established to have a mentor. It's helpful at any time in our lives. Next slide. And we wanted to point out a resource throughout our presentation, which we'll be sharing the slides. We have a lot of links in here that you'll be able to access, and a really wonderful guide. It's from 2006, so it's a little bit older, but still extremely relevant. It's from the American Psychological Association that created a presidential task force, which, showing how much they felt it was an important topic. And they really felt it was an integral part of being a psychologist. And so this is just a quick link to their guide. And so a great resource you can share with any of your mentors or mentees, especially if you set up your own program. So you might be wondering, how do you find a mentor? Where do you find them? And again, some of them could be within the institution, kind of like my relationships with Dr. Halmart and Dr. Jackson. Sometimes it's outside of the institution. We're going to be talking about specific examples of mentorship programs we've set up in both places. There's also the peer mentorship we discussed. And then also sometimes a specific interest or position might call for mentorship. I know sometimes if someone's wanting to get training in leadership, they may want to get a specific mentor in that, or if someone's wanting to develop a private practice. So it could be a lot of different places that you could look. All right, next slide. Okay, and then I've used this term, I believe, informal versus formal. And it's a term that kind of just shows how did that mentorship relationship develop. So good example, Dr. Halmart and I, our mentorship relationship started informally. I was on the curriculum committee with her, had this idea, and she just believed in me, believed in the idea, and was like, let's do it. So she helped me develop it, and it just kind of grew into a mentorship relationship. And often that is the case, it's around a certain task. A formal mentorship relationship is one that is actually set up by a specific program. And so the bulk of our presentation today is going to be on how to set up a formal program, especially if you identify that, that certain trainees or certain areas are kind of underserved, and we want to make sure that they have plenty of opportunities to have mentorship. Throughout our presentation, we are going to be going over these formal mentorship characteristics that are based on research showing what's to be effective to make sure your program, kind of reaches the goals that it wants to reach and is effective in providing this important service. And so back in 2003, again, an older article, still relevant, but they identified 6 primary characteristics. And then we actually decided to add our own 7th. So we just took the liberty to do that, adding diversity considerations and kind of how we've incorporated that into all of the programs that we've been a part of, and just really encourage that that's an important part, that it's worth even having its own area to really make sure and double check that your program is addressing those areas. So again, those areas are program objectives. You want your program to have that. How do you select participants? How do you identify that need? How do you match the mentors and mentees? We're going to talk about different processes with that. Also, training. Are you going to involve training for mentors and mentees? And we actually do have at the end of our program a link to APA has put out some online trainings for mentors. So we wish we had that back when we were setting up programs back in the day, but it's nice to have some sort of training for those involved in your program. Also guidelines for frequency of meeting, because there might be a lot of different expectations that mentors and mentees have. So really having that vision of what do you think would be most beneficial. And then a goal setting process. Kind of have those, how to have those SMART goals for the mentees and the mentors to make sure they're using their time effectively. And then lastly, the diversity considerations, just making sure that that is well thought through for various cultural factors and other factors. And we're going to be spending some time on that during the presentation in a specific area, as well as kind of incorporated throughout. Next slide. All right. And then we also just wanted to just mention, as we've talked about before, just during the pandemic, a lot of changes had to happen. And I'm sure many of the presenters, had started, envisioning this presentation prior to COVID, and then really want to adapt to really realize in the last year and a half, 2 years, how much this specific topic is especially important. There's actually a Forbes article I've included on here entitled "How Virtual Mentoring is Closing the Loneliness Gap During COVID-19." And that even being able to connect through mentoring and through virtual platforms, it's especially important. Even thinking about, there's a lot fewer interpersonal interactions with coworkers. I know even here at the VA, we're coming into the office, but we're still doing most things virtual. And so I miss those times spending time in the break room, or I used to be the one planning the morale boosting parties at different times, and we don't have that. So sometimes there is more of a loneliness that can set in. So especially during these times, it's really important. That now a benefit is that we've all gotten more comfortable with the technology platforms. And so, this increase really leads to more people considering virtual mentoring. And so it can really add a lot more opportunities that you might be mentored by someone across the country because they're in a similar interest area. Or maybe you aren't able to meet, over at UT Southwestern, but we can still do the virtual meetings and stay up to date on everything. So some mentorship relationships could be fully virtual. You can weigh out the pros and cons. Some could be partially in person, partially virtual, depending on the needs at that time. But the big pro is that now there's so many more opportunities. So you're not just limited to mentors in your geographical location. And now I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Hal Martin to talk about benefits of mentorship.
Hey everyone, I'm coming at you from the Fort Worth side of Dallas-Fort Worth. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So what I'm going to be talking about really is targeted towards those of you who would like to implement some sort of mentorship program, but need the time to do it, need the resources, need the support from your division, your department, your administration, something to be able to put these kinds of practices in place. So really these next few slides, which I'll go through relatively quickly, have to do with how does this benefit individuals, their careers, how does it benefit retention, and what are the financial implications for your organization? And so these are really important strategic conversations to put into place when you're doing something that seems really nice and fun, like mentoring, but takes a lot of time. You have to, people will let you work for free all you want to, but sometimes we need protected time to do these kinds of programs and to do them well. So hopefully this will give you a little bit of backup when you're trying to get these programs off the ground. First though, and I had a colleague bring this up to me. He said, so-and-so is going to be successful because they're going to find mentors. They're going to go out of their way and do it anyway. They're going to make it, whether we have an advising or a mentoring program or not. And I think that's kind of like a confound because we all have colleagues like that. We all have early career folks who join our groups who they are go-getters. They're going to figure it out whether or not they have a mentor. So this gets really complicated. And the fact is, the research says that it absolutely is true. People who come in with more self-confidence, more self-efficacy, it impacts their career trajectory. This makes a lot of sense. The issue is that if we don't incorporate formal mentoring and advising programs, then what we end up doing is disproportionately making individuals who lack a little bit of self-confidence or people who are not sure how to navigate these larger systems, we kind of leave them in the dark. So we end up creating this disparity between the go-getters and the people who are maybe not so sure or who haven't had the opportunity to do that position or haven't seen people successful who look like them. And so really, yes, people who were go-getters were going to pursue these opportunities anyway and would have been successful anyway. When we're talking about creating mentoring programs, we're talking about trying to close the gap and to formalize something so that everyone sort of has a fairer shot. So how does mentoring impact job satisfaction? Well, people report that it increases collegiality and increases the ways they build relationships, and networking is really important. And people do report if they engage in a formal mentoring program, they have higher levels of confidence and higher levels of morale. This is great stuff. But it also impacts people's career trajectories. Mentees, people who are formally mentored, are more likely to eventually hold senior faculty positions. They're more likely to get funding and promoted. They pick up new mentors along the way, right? They're introduced to so-and-so, who introduces them to so-and-so, who helps continue to build their career. So there's this stacking that happens. They tend to be more productive. Not only are they more productive, but they're mentors. If you're a mentor and you're mentoring a lot, you tend to be more academically productive. And it increases just overall research productivity and organizational stability. All right, you have people, they build relationships, it keeps things much more stable. It also positively impacts the financial institution. So if we have formal mentoring programs, this is a really key part to recruitment, to retention, and to advancement. And so if you're in an organization or an institution where that is a struggle, or if that has become a struggle, or that's a recurrent issue, and you don't have a formal mentoring program, we know the research shows us that this really helps with recruitment and retention and with stability. So a lot of these are from academic medicine, because this is where a lot of the research has been done on physicians in academic medicine, but I think we can definitely extrapolate some of these findings to psychology. It is very expensive to lose faculty, to lose practitioners in organizations, extraordinarily expensive. So this one study that I'm putting up here by Schloss and colleagues from 2009, the recruitment, hiring, and lost clinical income of just replacing a generalist, an assistant professor generalist, was over $100,000. I mean, that's a lot of money that could be spent in some other places. This other article looked at what it cost to replace a faculty member with an academic medicine, usually a physician, anywhere from $250,000 to $400,000. These are not small numbers for a department. If you have an operating budget of $2.5 million a year, $400,000 is quite a bit. And then you look at, especially women, so you look at what women say they need from institutions to remain in their jobs. Again, in academic medicine, but I think it's useful to look at. They are really looking for work-life integration, work-life balance. They want fair compensation, but they're also looking for peer mentors. They're looking for satisfaction with their mentors and for role models in their institution. So again, if we're looking at recruitment, we're looking at retention, and we're looking at the financial bottom line, I think it's extraordinarily important for us to think about whether or not we're putting into place formal programming. So again, if you're going to your organization, to your division, to your department and say, I really think we should have something that's very formal, and here's why, they'll say, sure, great, go do that in your spare time. But you can come back and really say, let's look at the financial repercussions of retention in our division, and can this be a stabilizing factor? So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over now to Dr. Jackson.
Thank you very much. So we want to really talk about how we can work to include and incorporate diversity into mentorship in a number of different ways in our mentorship programs. And like we talked about a little bit earlier, when we're talking about mentorship programs that we're creating, we're thinking about formal mentorship programs. So go to the next slide, please. All right, so oftentimes when we're thinking about mentorship, or especially when I've talked with trainees about mentorship, their first go-tos are these career-related mentorship goals, right? So I'd love to work with someone that I could talk to about their experiences with balancing private practice and working in a facility, or managing research in a clinical position, and how do you navigate those things? One of the ways that we really work toward creating and sustaining culturally sensitive mentorship programs is really by reminding our trainees, our faculty, our staff, that psychosocial factors are okay to talk about too. Sometimes people might feel afraid to bring those things up, and they might not feel comfortable requesting mentorship in a particular, around particular demographic areas. But I think that as individuals that are developing programs, we're really able to introduce that and let folks know that we are encouraging and supportive of them receiving mentorship in those areas as well. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we know is that mentoring helps to benefit in terms of recruitment, training, and retention of diverse trainees and diverse faculty. And that research has shown that formal mentoring is particularly helpful with promoting diversity in a number of settings. And so when we think about the way that informal mentorship relationships tend to develop, oftentimes they might develop, like Dr. Hal Martin was saying, because someone's really a go-getter and they see someone who they aspire to be like, they run up to them and ask them to be taken under their wing. And that person gladly does it, and they kind of run off into the sunset, and it's a beautiful mentorship relationship. But sometimes, particularly if you're coming from a background where you don't see a lot of people that look like you in a particular area, you might lack some of that confidence, and you might not take the initiative to run up to this person because you don't know if they're necessarily going to be supportive of mentoring you. You might not feel as comfortable with that. And so that's why formal mentoring programs really help to level the playing field in terms of ensuring that everyone is going to have an opportunity to touch base with someone who can help them to grow professionally in whatever particular areas they're wanting to grow and to explore different areas. So when you're thinking about developing your program, the first step is to figure out what are the areas that the folks that are my target demographic in terms of mentees, what do they want mentorship in? So it can be helpful to start with a survey of, if you're working with trainees, of trainees that exist at your facility. If you're doing it with staff, maybe surveying the staff about what are different areas that, if a mentorship program existed, that they would be interested in receiving mentorship in. That could be open-ended. It could be where there are options that are offered, but really trying to get a sense of what are the goals and how can we craft a program that's really going to speak to our target demographic of the individuals who are at our site or are working in our facility, and kind of going from there, including a hierarchy of priorities. So you can get a sense of, there are a lot of people who are looking for mentorship in X, Y, or Z area. So that might mean that we are going to structure things a little bit differently. Maybe we're going to have some group mentorship sessions or something going on if we're talking about promotion, tenure, research, things like that, where maybe everybody is clamoring to have someone to hold and talk to about some of those professional issues. And also getting a sense of, if you're getting a lot of inquiries around people wanting to talk about issues of religion, issues of ability, of sexuality, all those kinds of things are really rich information for you to learn about and to figure out how you're going to meet the needs of the folks at your site. At our site, we did a survey of our trainees and asked them what were particular areas that they were interested in mentorship for, and these were the areas that came up, which involves a really broad range of areas. And one of the things that's nice about these options that we now give to our trainees at the beginning of the year when they're trying to figure out what they're wanting to prioritize for mentorship, is that it really normalizes and puts right out there that demographic factors are okay to talk about. Again, folks don't always know that your site or your setting is a safe space where it's okay to talk about the fact that, maybe I'm the first person in my family to go to college and I'm having trouble navigating various things related to that, or I want to talk about being from a particular background and how that does or doesn't impact my work in a particular setting. In addition to, I want to learn more about how you learn how to be a great teacher or a great supervisor in addition to a clinician. So again, marrying those psychosocial factors with the career-related factors that we more traditionally, I think about with respect to mentorship. So once you've identified what people want mentorship about, the next step is to identify who are going to be your mentors. And so depending on the size of your site and your facility, sometimes this might be tricky, but you can offer up the same bevy of options that your potential mentees are requesting in terms of areas where they're wanting mentorship, and reach out to the folks that are potential mentors to see who would be interested in providing mentorship in those various areas. That's one of the things that we've done at our site, is we provided that robust list that we looked at a minute ago to our staff and said, hey, let us know which of these areas you'd be willing to talk with someone about should someone want mentorship in that area down the line, so that we can have kind of a bank of people. That can look a little bit different if you're at a smaller site. We have over 100 psychologists at our site, so that's different than a site that maybe has 10 psychologists or something like that, where you might have to expand your pool of mentors maybe in different ways. Maybe you look at different disciplines or affiliated sites or things like that that might be potential resources as well if your site is a little bit smaller. For your training programs, you really want to make sure that you're considering the power differentials that go along with supervision when you're developing a mentorship program. It can really be helpful to just exclude someone who is actively supervising someone from the potential mentorship pool of a trainee in particular. That can be the case with staff as well, but certainly for trainees. Some programs like to provide a list of mentors, so they'll have potential mentors write up a bio about themselves. It might include professional things, they'll include some personal things. I like to fish and camp, and I like climbing mountains, so whatever kind of personal things that give someone a flavor of who you are and what you might be like to work with as a mentor, all those kinds of things. And the trainees are able to evaluate that and kind of pick from a booklet of individuals and kind of go from there. And some programs offer formal training for mentors. And so that can look a number of different ways, which we'll talk about in a bit. So you've identified your mentors, you've identified what your mentees want mentorship about. Now you've got to put the two together and make some matches. So there are a number of ways that you can do this. It could be mentee driven. So maybe the mentees look through the booklet of mentors and they flip through, and you've got pictures, you've got descriptions, you've got all kinds of cool things, and they identify someone and bam, that's going to be their mentor. You could go the other way where it's more mentor driven, where you provide your mentors with a list of, these are the folks that are wanting mentorship in X, Y, and Z, who wants involvement, and the mentor just kind of picks. You could create some kind of APIC match type of system in which priorities are, there's a mysterious algorithm that does all the things and connects folks. What the research really suggests, though, is that you really get the best outcomes when you're able to have input from both parties. So rather than a mysterious system making the match, or one person making the match, whether it's the mentee or the mentor, it really can be helpful to have an involvement with both. So one of the ways that we try to operationalize that is we'll have trainees make their prioritize, what they're looking for in a mentor. And based on that, we know who they might match with. You might talk to that supervisor and say, hey, such and such wants to learn about this. Would you be willing to mentor them about that? If they say yes, go back to the trainee like, hey, thinking about matching with Dr. X. What do you think about that? And sometimes they're like, oh, I love Dr. X. Yes, definitely match me with them. Or they might say, actually, I was kind of hoping I could get matched with, Dr. Y, in which case, we can talk about that and we can make the switch. But it's important for the mentee and the mentor to feel like they have some autonomy and some choice in those matches. And again, part of the reason that you want to avoid using direct supervisors is because we want the mentor or the mentee to feel comfortable expressing different issues, different problems, different strengths and weaknesses with their mentor in a manner that people often don't feel comfortable discussing with someone who's also evaluating them. The nature of a mentor-mentee relationship is that there should not be an evaluative component to it. And so that runs directly counter to working with a direct supervisor. You also want to outline an exit strategy. This is an important point that I think can get missed. You really want to, at the beginning, let people know if it isn't a good match, this is what you do. That doesn't mean that now for the rest of the training year, for the rest of your life or whatever, you have to meet with this person once a month whom you despise. We hope that we're making good matches, but sometimes it's not a good fit, or sometimes it is a good fit, but the area that the person wanted mentorship in just isn't kind of a long-term thing. Like we have 4 wonderful conversations about it, and that's kind of it. Like I've gotten what I needed, and that can be okay. So discussing whatever your process is going to be for reassigning, if there's reassigning that could be done because the mentorship relationship is not a good fit, or the person's mentorship priorities shift. And so they want to work with someone else around a different topic, potentially later in the year. Just letting people know that that's okay can be helpful. Otherwise, people might languish in mentorship relationships that aren't fun for anyone. All right, so you are now developing your mentorship program. So we're going to spend some time talking about some of the specifics for our various programs. Do the next one. So we'll talk about the training programs that we have. It says in the VA. So any VA psychologists that are on the call can attest to every VA is very, very different. So this is at the Dallas VA that we're going to be talking about the mentorship program, and also the mentorship program that goes on with that for our early career psychologist, as well as how you might look at a program for local associations, so like Dallas Psychological Association, because we're in Dallas, or something along those lines, as well as in an academic setting, like a wonderful prestigious teaching institution such as UT Southwestern. All right, so talking about the VA. So first we're going to talk about the training mentorship model. And we're going to look at all of these programs using the same model. So you'll get to know and love this wonderful little diagram that Dr. Hal Martin came up with. It's super awesome. So the first thing that you want to do when you're developing your program is figure out what your objectives are. What's the goal here? For our training programs, the goal is professional development and support for our trainees. So ideally, a mentor is someone that the trainee can bounce ideas off of, can share, any kind of issues they're having with the cohort or with a supervisor or navigating the program in some capacity, and can help them to figure out how to navigate those things. Is it something where they need to do a role play about how to give feedback to a supervisor that they're having a hard time with, or talk through applying for postdocs or jobs and figuring out whether or not they want to do which of those and all of those kinds of things. Next, you want to select your participants. So that's easy breezy in a training program. Your participants are going to be your trainees, and your mentors are going to be the staff psychologists that are at your site. But again, I will say that it's okay to be flexible about who are going to be your mentors. So for example, every once in a while we'll have a trainee that's interested in something super niche, where of the 100 people on staff, we still just don't have someone who does that particular thing. So for example, they might be interested in, oh, I'd love to work in a central office position or whatever. Well, folks that work in VA central office either live in DC or they work from home. So they're not at our VA generally. And so if we know of people, and we do know of people that live in the area that work for central office, then they might not be someone that's on our magic mentor list. But it could be somebody that I just reach out to, like, hey, we have a trainee who's really interested in learning about X, Y, or Z. Would you be willing to meet with them once a month during the training year and share your experience or expertise in this particular area? And usually, they're like fine. So I think you don't have to feel like you're wed to this one group of individuals if someone is looking for mentorship in an area that really is a little bit different than what you're prepared for. In terms of matching the mentors and mentees, you really want to start with your mentee preferences. That's typically what we do. And from there, we'll go to the mentors and try to see who would be a good fit. And then back to the mentees to get their feedback about, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think about that? And allow them to share their input and kind of go back and forth in that way, and also making sure that it's not someone who's going to be a supervisor. For our program in particular, we really are encouraging the trainees to use the mentorship as an opportunity to learn something else. So for example, oftentimes our neuropsych trainees will want to have a neuropsychologist as their mentor. Well, you're going to work with 6 neuropsychologists over the course of the year. I promise you'll get to learn about what it's like to be a neuropsychologist in a hospital. I promise you will have that conversation several times. So what we really want to do with the mentor is give you an opportunity to have conversations that you aren't going to naturally have just as a function of your rotations, and to expand your horizons, to be able to talk with someone about something different. Now, if somebody has a burning desire, they're going to be devastated they can't work with a neuropsychologist, we might pair them with one if there's another dynamic. So for example, every once in a while, someone would be interested in leadership or something like that. And so they, one of our neuropsychologists is also a clinical director. And so they might get paired with that person so they can have some of those conversations, but really encouraging them to use mentorship as an opportunity to talk about something that is not going to already organically come up in every other supervision session that they have. In terms of training for mentors and mentees, this can be approached in a number of different ways. The way that we have ours set up is that we have an outline. There's a section of our trainee handbook that goes over the mentorship program and what the expectations are for the mentee and for the mentor, so that that's very clear. There's also a similar section in our supervision handbook that all of our supervisors have. And if someone kind of rogue and random is pulled in, and then they're provided that information as well. You want to establish the guidelines for the frequency of meetings. And this is where you can really introduce the idea of you don't have to meet religiously every month if you don't want to, or if it's not helpful. And so for our program, they would meet with their mentor once a month, but that's going to be mentee driven. So if you are feeling like this month, you know, you're kind of good, you don't really need to have a conversation about anything, then you don't have to schedule the appointment. If you do want to meet, then the person is open and super willing to meet with you and to go from there. Oftentimes people will spend a lot of time working with their mentees at the beginning of the year. That's when people are feeling super angsty. And then once they have established their plan for whatever the next year is going to be, then they might not be as pressed to have those regular meetings or as other things heat up. And that's totally fine. You want to make sure the trainees are expressing their goals for mentorship prior to being matched, because that's going to be a big part of it. And by introducing the idea that diversity considerations are encouraged by virtue of the fact that they're one of the first things that you see on the list of mentorship options, you really want to highlight to trainees that you're trying to allow them opportunities to get mentorship around their entire identity, not just a small sliver of it that they might feel like is what is sanctioned at this point. All right, so in terms of the outlines, you can provide the guidelines for both parties. There are some programs that have a mentorship specific handbook, so you can certainly do that if that is helpful. You can have the subsection of handbooks that you already have. And again, you want to make sure everybody's on the same page about the frequency of meetings and also what to do if there's an issue with mentorship. So if they're trying to establish meetings, but the person never seems to have, the mentor seems to never have time to meet with them, what do they do in those situations, and things like that. And you want to gather feedback, especially if you're early on in the process of developing this type of program. You want to get feedback from your mentees about how they felt like the matching process went. Did they feel like it was a good process? Did they feel like they would have liked it to be a little bit different, or to have more say so or less say so, and kind of go from there. How useful did they find the meetings is really good information to get, and that's another way of getting it. Data about how good your matching process is, and any areas for improvement that they might want to share with you. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Reiner, who's going to talk about early career psychology.
All right. So another program that we set up that I was a part of is with our early career psychology committee that I was on when I first came to the Dallas VA. And so it was basically it was to match up early career psychologists with experienced psychologist mentors. And so that was the program objective. And even as an early career psychologist on the committee, just found that was a need that I had and other committee members had. And so we kind of developed this process to select participants. And I'm going to kind of run through this a little bit quickly due to time. We actually emailed our entire psychology service and just to kind of find out the interest of mentees and mentors. and then kind of based it on how many mentees we had, because we wanted every mentee to have a mentor. So we first collected mentee preferences. How we matched them, we collected the mentee preferences, and then we kind of found, we saw who volunteered of the mentors, and then we also did a little bit of strategic targeted emails to those that we thought could be a good fit, because we do a very large service here. And then the ECP committee set up the matches based upon the goals that had been described. So training for the mentors and mentees, we didn't have any formal training. Now that we know that there's these great APA resources, we probably would have sent them those. But there wasn't any formal training, but we did offer optional consultation at any time, just, especially in case there was any difficulties in the mentorship relationship. Guidelines for meeting, we set up an hour a month for 6 to 12 months. We decided to make it for kind of the calendar year, but they could opt out early if needed. And we found that that was pretty good for the schedule of everyone at the VA. For goal setting, we assisted the mentees in setting specific mentorship goals prior to the match process. So kind of sent them some documents, kind of like Dr. Jackson was mentioning, and just made sure that those were really set up before we even started targeting finding mentors for them. We also, for diversity considerations, we really wanted to highlight preferences, factors, just give them permission to speak about any area that they wanted to make sure to cover in mentorship. And so we want to make sure that was matched up. So this is kind of a very quick snapshot of how you could set up a program with early career psychologists in kind of a department like the VA. Now, the next one I'll talk about is a very different setting. So a few years ago, actually, when I was living in San Antonio, I was involved in the Bexar County Psychological Association, first as their early career representative, and then the president-elect, and then president. And through that whole process, we really identified that the local association members that were earlier in their career really didn't often have those places to find mentors. And so, because they maybe weren't, a lot of them were in private practice. And so that's why we wanted to match any interested association members with mentors. So we actually sent an email and invited them to come to a, quote, mentor matchup event. And we actually developed this plan to do actually speed mentoring, which was kind of interesting. So a little bit of a creative, prior to COVID, when we could meet up at a coffee shop, have some space available. We had the mentors set up at tables, and I had a stopwatch, and we gave them a certain amount of time to meet. And then afterward, they could kind of mingle, get to know each other even more. And then we did a little bit more mentee driven, where they would give their rankings. But of course, if any mentors found that they really didn't mesh well with a certain person, we made sure not to match anyone up that wouldn't want to be matched up. So it's a really fun time and just a really social time. And then training, again, no formal training, but we shared guidelines, and we did elicit some formal feedback, offered that optional consultation. And then guidelines for meeting, we left it pretty loose just because, people have a lot of different lives, in our group that we had. Again, it was a very diverse group of psychologists, just what their day-to-day lives looked like. So we just said at least 3 times over the next year. We got the feedback, many of them met much more than that. And then for goal setting, we just had the mentees set specific goals prior to the event, provide them to the board, but then really encourage them to discuss those during those short times, the speed mentoring times, as well as at any time afterward. And then for diversity, we just really encouraged them, gave them that permission to really consider those diversity factors, and then want to keep those in mind as we were getting to know the mentors, because even since we solicited from our wide membership list, we really didn't know a lot about some of the mentors and mentees. So we, again, looked through their CVs. We just made sure it was a good fit. All right. So that's kind of another snapshot of a very different kind of a program. And now we'll send it back to Laura, Dr. Hal Martin.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk briefly about another mentorship program that we set up based on a problem that was sort of identified within our teaching faculty. And this was really Dr. Reiner's baby. She talked about sort of that was her big idea. And I was the chair of the curriculum committee at the time. And she said, hey, let's do this. And I said, great, sure, let's figure it out. So what had been happening is that we'd had a few years of sort of, I would call them Yelp type student reviews for some of our faculty instructors. And of course, student reviews come at the end of the semester. That was really difficult because there wasn't a whole lot of time for faculty to change what they were doing, but they would get some of these reviews at the end and would think, well, I would have changed something had I known. Our doctoral program is also really large and very spread out. So sometimes our instructors would come in, they would teach one class that may be all the interaction they may have with students at that time. And so, you know, it was hard, especially if you were new, to kind of get to know the culture of our program and our students. And then we had some instructor turnover. And like I talked about before, and turnover is expensive in terms of time and money. And so one of the solutions to this was to really get especially our first time instructors to start getting early course feedback from students, meaning within 4 or 5 weeks of the semester starting, to get anonymous feedback. And then to have them sort of have a mentor, an instructor mentor, a teacher who had gotten really great reviews from students who had won teaching awards before. We had several of those on our faculty, to engage in a confidential mentoring relationship with them around what they needed, and then also be able to debrief some of this early course feedback to help them course correct. And our proposal of this was help with turnover, and this would increase program engagement. And so we look at this again. These were our objectives, was to increase engagement, decrease turnover. Every participant was anybody who was either a new instructor in the Division of Psychology, or they were an instructor who was teaching a new course for the first time. So it could be either one. And the mentors were selected from teaching award recipients. So if you had won an outstanding teaching award from our students, they're given to one faculty member once a year over the past several years. Then we asked you if you'd be willing to be a mentor. We tended to match them based on content knowledge. So somebody teaching statistics would get mentored by somebody who had had some knowledge of teaching or doing a lot of statistical work. So sort of content area when we could. A couple of months before the semester started, they would get a match invitation saying, hey, y'all have been matched together. Here are the expectations. Please meet before the semester starts. And then again, after you get your early course feedback. And as much or as little after that as you need to throughout the semester. We didn't do any formal training. We gave people instructions through email. They knew it was coming, and we said, please meet for at least 2 hours, which wasn't necessarily a very high demand, but we thought maybe it would be just enough to meet those goals. We didn't want to make it overly burdensome for either party. They needed to meet once before the semester started, and then at least once after the new instructor received their early feedback form. Goal setting was really predetermined, like I talked about before. And then we really were seeing this intersect with retention of early career faculty who are coming in, and particularly racial minority faculty. This is becoming more and more important to our students in terms of who was teaching their core classes, who were they seeing in front of them as role models, who is teaching them. And so we were trying to give greater consideration to how do we formally work to recruit and retain, particularly our racial minority instructors. So this was the program that we came up with. A couple of qualitative comments. It's a really small program, so we don't have a lot of quantitative data. But one of the things, these are some of the things that people said. When there were problems, I had somebody who could circle back quickly to address those issues. It was really nice to meet someone outside of my immediate area. So that speaks to that sort of networking. Ongoing communication, reaching out really helped me. What would you recommend? They actually wanted more structure. Like, can you please remind us to do this? Can you remind us to have these meetings and check-ins? Can we have a final debrief meeting at the very end of the semester to talk about it? So what we found is that people really needed a little bit more structure than maybe we had given them, and sort of these reminders to say, hey, have you met with your teaching or your instructor mentor this semester? It's just something to think about if you're trying to set something like this up. I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Reiner.
Great. Yeah, it's been kind of neat to reflect on some of the different programs that we've been, each of us have kind of had a hand in, and just seeing the commonalities, but also the differences. We wanted to touch on, I know there's not a lot of time, but just touch on potential ethical issues that can come up. and mentorship relationships. And this next slide is actually probably the busiest one of the whole presentation. Because we wanted to leave that in for everyone just to refer back to later on if you're setting up your own mentorship program, just to use this as kind of a checklist. We have the references there as well that you can get a little bit more information, but just ways you can look at any breaches in confidentiality, setting those expectations for how private are the conversations that you're having, especially depending on the content. If it's really personal, they may not want others knowing about it. If it's a project, they may be fine with others knowing about it. Conflicts of interest, areas of power, that, a lot of times the things we talk about are very either personal or professional, but making sure that we're not, there's no theft of ideas, conflict over authorship, of course, on an extreme level, bullying, exploitation, harassment, but just being aware of kind of in the room, am I the big fish or the little fish? And some of those things that might come into play. Being aware of dual roles. If you're already a supervisor, how is that going to be with being a mentor? And that might be something to avoid. Another thing, unrealistic expectations. So, we all have expectations about probably everything in life, and really setting those expectations of, oh, this will not be a daily contact kind of a mentorship relationship, or this is the task that we're working on, and we'll meet during that task, but maybe not after. So kind of just setting those expectations, and even modeling for the mentee what that's going to look like. Now that's where also mentorship contract can be helpful. I participated in mentoring some of our postdocs and interns, and that contract that Dr. Jackson has set up is so helpful because it just starts off with those boundaries in place. And of course, oversight by a formal mentorship program can be really helpful. The fifth area we want to highlight is access. Sometimes there can be limited opportunities for certain individuals, like Dr. Jackson was mentioning, or maybe limited diversity goals that are talked about. So making sure that those are highlighted, attending to all the different factors that we're discussing, being aware of the developmental need of the mentee. So this is just a little checklist to kind of keep in mind. And then next slide. And then final thoughts on effective and ethical mentoring. These are kind of characteristics of effective mentors, which I believe Dr. Hal Martin and Dr. Jackson really exude. And this is where really kind of like these are aspirational. Of course, some of us may look at this and be like, wow, that's a lot. But just even a lot of times we may be coming across in these ways that we're not even aware of. So even having humor, being flexible, showing, modeling to them how you have work-life balance. A lot of times those things, how we make them feel is really what we're going to leave them with. So those are just, again, other ones to just keep in mind, especially when you're setting up a program and all. And then lastly, we just have that link to the next slide, the Art and Science of Excellent Mentoring from APA. And just this is a great resource. They have some training videos, becoming a master mentor and ethical issues in mentoring relationship, which is going to go a lot more into a lot of those factors I just highlighted. So again, now that we know this resource going forward, I definitely plan to incorporate that in any future programs, just that it's wonderful having all these virtual and kind of online resources. So I guess without further ado, we'll kind of open it up for questions. We do have our reference list on there, a lot of great resources out there. So we'll be sending the slides to Dr. Mendoza-Newman with that so she can share those. But yeah, we'll open it up for questions and we'll all kind of participate. And feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or put anything in the chat box, either way.
Thank you so much. While folks may be prepared to ask their questions, I had, I guess, a comment and then a question myself. One was, I've provided a lot of mentorship to other training directors in my role, both through APIC and through ACTA. And I'm currently a mentor for a program that supports students at the undergraduate level applying for graduate school. And so I just really valued your comment earlier that was actually evidence-based, I suppose, about, I was thinking about marginalized groups and first gens, and I myself identify as a first gen, and so how we're not pedigreed into these systems, and how wonderful it has been to have mentors that guide us when we don't know what to ask, what resources, how to apply, how to do all of that. So the mentorship I'm providing these undergrads is really meaningful in that way to just improve the pipeline of more students of color. So it was just sort of a comment. The question I do have, though, I'm leading a supervision of supervision, and our postdocs supervise our interns, and they're learning about this emerging role and is that for therapy or is this for supervision, and what are the boundaries? So we're talking a lot about this in Soup of Soup, and so with what they're grappling right now, I guess my question is, they were trying to decide, gosh, we're not talking about cases, but we're talking about postdoc applications. Is that okay? And so I'm wondering about the differentiation between supervision and mentorship, when you can bring some of these issues up in supervision, and then mentors might also support the exploration of these. What if they get mixed messages from, or two different pieces of advice? Like, how are they navigating these two kinds of relationships? Just any ideas or guidance about how to differentiate supervision from mentorship?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the things it makes me think about is when I was talking about some of our neuropsych trainees, they're like, I need to be paired with a neuropsychologist, but they're going to be supervised by a million of them over the course of the year. And we know that in good supervision, I mean, you talk about your clinical cases, but at some point you talk about who the person is as an individual, what their goals are, and all of those different things that I do think can blur the lines and can bleed over into mentorship or into being more invested in, well, if this is your goal long-term, have you considered this and all these other things, and maybe you might try reaching out to this person, and all those kinds of things that are very mentorship adjacent. I think the distinction between having a distinct mentor is that because there is the non-evaluative component to it, the person might be a little more open, and they can have the benefit that they would get from a supervisor, but in another venue where they might know something that's a little bit different, or they're in a position to provide feedback about something that someone may not feel comfortable talking with their supervisor about. But I think you're right. I think hopefully a good supervisor, I think, does sprinkle some mentorship in there. It's hard to be invested in working with someone and not sprinkle that mentorship in there, I think.
Yeah, I was also going to add that that I think that there can be a very blurred line. I think that sometimes when we think of supervisory relationships, there's such a hierarchy of needs of what needs to happen in that supervision time that, with the clinical needs of the patient, and you're overseeing so many different areas. The note needs to be in by the end of the day, and all those kind of things that I think sometimes these areas that mentorship can cover just get lost. And so this is where there can be a set aside, carved out time in a very safe relationship where you're not being evaluated. And so especially those very personal factors, or maybe ones that someone feels they have imposter syndrome and they don't feel comfortable telling their supervisor how they're not confident in a certain area, but they can process that with a mentor in a safe place, and then build up, to be able to even explore with their supervisor eventually. So I think it really goes hand in hand with supervision and other relationships we had, but it's definitely a unique kind of relationship.
Excellent, thank you. We do have a question in the chat. Is it okay to seek potential mentors outside of the discipline of psychology, social work, for example, especially when seeking identity-based mentorship?
Absolutely. So I have a whole network of mentors myself, inside my institution, outside my institution, other places, and it's wonderful. Most of them are psychologists, but I think about two that I have that are really important in my career development and my personal development. One is a psychiatrist, I have a very close relationship, and the other one's a chaplain who works at our county hospital. And so they mentor me in different ways. And what I love about having or creating mentorship relationships that are outside of people's bubbles, including our professional guild bubble, is that it really just makes you a much more well-rounded, I think, person, a much more well-rounded clinician. So depending on what you're seeking, I got what I was needing from those relationships, and certainly send some of my mentors or students, my mentees or students, to other disciplines to learn things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add that sometimes it can be helpful, if you're having your potential mentees rank kind of what some of their priorities are with mentorship, to circle back to them to say, okay, you listed out these 3 things, and we've got this psychologist who could check these couple of boxes, and we've got this social worker that could check these couple of boxes. What do you think? And get their feedback and get their input. I think it's totally appropriate depending on what their priorities are and what kind of professional discussions they're trying to have.
Yeah,
You'll-
yeah. Go ahead, Laura.
Also to say, I was thinking about this as well, you'll also find that sometimes you need especially if you're going into leadership, you may need somebody with much more of an MBA sort of leadership mindset, and they won't always be a psychologist, but learning how somebody with that sort of leadership background and strategic planning perspective, those can be wonderful mentors as well.
Yeah, and I was also going to add just sometimes almost doing a decisional balance or a pros and cons list of, the different factors of, if someone is outside of the field of psychology, you may get unique things from them, but they may not be able to relate with certain factors of psychology. So kind of looking at that wide variety. And then also there's a great comment in the chat just about if there's a space for mentees to have multiple mentors. And that's where I know the formal programs I've been a part of, the goal was to match one mentee with one mentor. So that was kind of our role. But if someone came back and wanted to be matched with someone for something else and they had the space and time and capacity, I don't see really any problem with that. I think it's just, again, weighing out the pros and cons of, because each mentorship relationship is a relationship and it takes investment. Kind of the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. So especially if it was a trainee and they may not be aware of like how spread thin they are, maybe we would weigh those pros and cons out together. But I agree, kind of like Dr. Hal Martin was mentioning, just having a variety of mentors, we can get so many different things from different people, and some are short-term, some are long-term. I think another comment in the chat was just from Dr. Baker was just how important mentors have been, and to really reach out to them, reconnect, and and show that gratitude to them, because a lot of times people have no idea the impact that they have on us. So thank you for those comments.
Thank you. Any additional questions folks might have? We're all comfortable with different forms of silence, and maybe it's time to wrap up. Certainly very great. Oh, there is one more. Oh no, now it's all the thank yous. Yay. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for your time, your expertise, and sharing what you know. I think it will certainly help us develop our mentorship programs. And yes, again, thank you to everyone for attending our year-long conference webinar series. Again, stay tuned for more details about registration for the 2022 conference.
Yes, thank you to all the presenters. Wonderful. Have a great weekend and a great Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy holidays, everybody. Take good care. Bye.